Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here on a Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. I know that your time is very, very busy and important, so I'll try and make this as quick and efficient for all of you as possible, because I'm sure you've all got other things to be doing, like eating, like relaxing, and hopefully sleeping at some time that's not too late this evening. So the plan for this evening is to go to the Global Terrorism Database website to show you how to download the data, and then to go through some rudimentary steps in Microsoft Excel. Before we get going, there's a couple of things that I wanted to suggest to you all. One is that you may want to follow along in real time what I'm doing on your computer. So feel free to not make this full screen and to be following along in another tab or something like that that you have open. I definitely and wholly encourage that. I will also not be downloading the data in real time because that will take some time. So instead, I have already pre-downloaded the data so that we can see what it is. I'm also using the data that goes from 1995 to 2012 just to speed up the analyzation process as well. So other than that, all the steps will be exactly the same. We're just not going to be waiting for my computer to download things on my very slow home internet. So I'm going to hit share screen, and we're going to go to Google Chrome for this. It doesn't matter too much what you use. I tend to recommend Google Chrome because it just works better with a lot of the stuff that we do. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Global Terrorism Database. As you can see here, this is what it looks like. And we're going to be doing this from absolute scratch, assuming you've never been there, which of course I know that you'll have been there before. I'm going to go to Global Terrorism Database, start.umd.edu. And the link to get to the database itself is this first one here at the top. There we go. And so when we get to the database itself, you've all seen this part before. We're going to click on access the GTD. Next, we're going to get to a screen that's going to take us in a different direction. Usually, and that's far for quiz 2, we were going to search and browse. This time, we're going to go to download instead. We're going to hit download. That's going to take us to the bottom. You're going to have to decide whether you're an individual or an organization. All of you are individuals, which makes things nice and simple. So we're going to scroll down, and we're going to go to individual use. We're going to go to GTD download. And what you'll do is you'll enter in a whole bunch of different things like this to put your details in. So for this, our name today is going to be Lewis Friend. The email is going to be lewisfriend@gmail.com. Feel free to actually use your real one because it's handy for them to have. We're going to create a password, which you're not going to see. Our academic institution is the Citadel. And the nature of the research is going to be training students. Which country are we all in? We are still in these United States. And we're going to accept the terms and conditions. And then we're going to hit register. You're then going to type in these things. We're going to use our email address, which was Lewis Friend. And we're going to type in our handy dandy password again. Log in. And so this is going to take us to this page within the Global Terrorism Database. I'm going to quickly X out of that remember the password because we're not going to remember this because it's not a real account. And we're going to go to view resources. Here you'll see we get a number of different options that are available here. One is the full data set here, which is from 1970 to 2019. One is the Global Terrorism Database Codebook, which I strongly recommend downloading. One of the things that I did mention, if you can think all the way back to the very beginning of the semester, is that there are no data in the Global Terrorism Database for 1993 because Pinkerton, the company called Pinkerton, lost those data somehow. Nobody knows how, nobody knows why, but it did unfortunately happen. So there are no terrorism data for 1993, unfortunately. So for this, you'd click on one of these different ones here. If it was you, one of the things I do is download the full data set. But as I mentioned before, tonight for the actual analysis itself, we're going to be concentrating on the 1995 to 2012, just to speed up the individual steps that we've got ahead of us. So one of the cool things about being at the Citadel is you get access to the entire Microsoft Office suite for free. So if you do not have Microsoft Word, if you do not have Microsoft Excel, if you do not have Microsoft PowerPoint, Google Citadel Microsoft Office or something to that effect, and follow the links, and you'll be able to download it all for free. So definitely take advantage of that, particularly if you're thinking about graduating anytime soon. That way you'll have it on your computer for the days after you've graduated from here. And free amazing software is free amazing software. So one of the things that I'll assume from here on out is that you have Microsoft Excel. So now I'm going to stop sharing this screen and switch over to Microsoft Excel. So this is what Microsoft Excel looks like and what the data look like once you download them from the Global Terrorism database. One of the key things that I will double check whenever you open up a new spreadsheet for the first time is see where it starts. In this particular iteration of it, it starts in the year 1995, in the first month of the year, which is January. Some of the months, some of the terrorist attacks don't have a day specified, in which case there'll be a day equals 0 for those sorts of things. And you can see that there's a whole bunch of different variables that you've never even seen thus far in the full Global Terrorism database that you can't actually necessarily search for through the online portal, including where the source of the data comes from, who collected the data originally, some more detail about the weapons. This one was poison, which is a very interesting thing that you very rarely see. And you can see there's a whole bunch more information here, particularly to do with the nationality of the victims, what the specific target was. In this case, it was the Russian military. We've got the different target types that exist. We've got subtypes within each of those things. So even within abortion-related terrorism, some of them target clinics, other target doctors more directly, for example. And you can see that there's a wealth of much more information. And if you're taking a class, hypothetically, theoretically, in a world that does not exist, which involves geocoding data, here's some geoloc coordinates for the latitude and the longitude as well, which you could use to actually plot these things out on a map, which could be crazy interesting for a good project for a class at the Citadel, potentially. So this is what Microsoft Excel looks like. We have different rows, which are expressed numerically, and we have different columns, which are expressed alphabetically. So any cell has a location, which refers to the column ID followed by the row ID. So this cell here, for example, would be C8. And so I'll be using this notation to describe and walk our way through these things. There are many different ways to make graphs, but specifically one of the things that you might want to do for the project for this class is to create a graph that displays how terrorism changes over time in a particular country. This would look fantastic for a final project. And this is what we're kind of leading to. So one of the, I made an example earlier based on Bangladesh, because nobody's ever chosen Bangladesh before. And so this is the graph and this is where we're going to be ended up moving towards creating a graph like this. It looks clean, it looks professional. And you can see in this that we have the number of people killed in the terrorist attacks, which is the solid black line here. And we have the number of terrorist attacks that occurred in Bangladesh in each given year, which is this dotted black line here. So this is what we're moving towards. As you can see, there's a few steps that we need to go through before we get there. But what we're going to be doing essentially is taking these raw data here, which go on and 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 on, et cetera, et cetera. There's literally thousands upon thousands of terrorist attacks within the database, as you know. And we're going to turn this into something that looks like a graph in just a handful of minutes. So this, from this point, should take about 14 or so minutes. It will likely take you a little bit longer when you go through this. One of the things that I recommend doing after we're done today is to watch the video through either Canvas or through YouTube. So that way you can pause it, you can hit rewind, and remember to rewind on YouTube, you hit the J key and it takes you back 10 seconds. And that way you can work through it step by step. The other thing I consider doing is taking a lot of notes as you go through this, just in case you have a professional job someday and your boss wants you to create a graph like this and you can't remember how to do it step by step, but you know that you can do it. If you've taken lots and lots of notes, that way you could go back through and work through those notes and get you the graph that you want. This method will also work on all different versions of the Microsoft Excel downloads from the Global Terrorism database. So this isn't peculiar to the 1995 to 2012 dataset. So first step is going to be kind of diving in the deep end. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to insert a pivot table. And a pivot table in Excel, if you've never used one before, is one of the most amazing tools that exist within all of Microsoft Excel. What it does is it gives you a way to summarize data very quickly and very easily. To do this, the first step is to click anywhere within the data. So it doesn't matter whether it's our old friend C8, we could go to F18, we could go to I5, does not matter. As long as it's somewhere within the data set, this will work. So click anywhere. Let's go to our friend C8 again, just because we can. And then go to this tab here called Insert. And as you can see here, there's a button here called Pivot Table. When you click on Pivot Table, it's going to bring up a window with some different options. It's going to ask you to select a table or range. It's going to auto select all of the data within the global terrorism database because we clicked somewhere in the middle here. You can also do this manually by clicking this button here and then clicking and dragging to select individual cells of data. But for this, we want it all because we're greedy like that. Next, we have an option whether to create a new worksheet to start working in or to do this in an existing worksheet. To begin with, we're going to start off nice and fresh so there's nothing confusing in it. And we're going to start a new worksheet for this. And when you click OK, Microsoft Excel will take a second to prepare all of the data, and then it'll create a brand new tab for us to do our analyses in. Once it eventually does open, you'll get something that looks like this. This is where the pivot table will be populated. You'll also get this window on the right, which has filters, it has columns, it has rows, and it's got values. So our columns are going to be the ones that are like the things that differentiate along the top. Our rows are going to be what's differentiated going up and down here. Values are going to be what's going to be in the middle of our graph here. So it's going to be what the actual data are for this. So who would like to be a very, very brave volunteer and suggest that a country for us to do our analysis on?
India, sir.
India, excellent. Let's do India. To find a country, there are two different options that we've got. We've got a variable called country text, which we can get by just scrolling down in this variable name up the top here. And we also have country underscore text. Because you haven't memorized all of the different country numbers, and this is what it'll look like if you put in the country, you just get a sequence of numbers. Unless you've memorized all of the numbers as they correspond to countries, this isn't going to help too much. So instead of that, we're going to click on country text and we're going to drag it down into our rows box here. And we drop it in the box and we get all of these things. So while we do care about all of these different countries, for this particular thing, we're just going to be focusing on India. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to filter our pivot table so that it only returns data pertaining to India. To do this, we click this down arrow here, and you'll see that it'll come up with all these things here. The first thing we're going to do is deselect or unselect all of the different countries here, and you can see the matrix behind update to reflect this. And there's a couple of different ways we can do that. We can scroll down until we get to India. But if you are feeling a bit lazy, if you want to be a little bit more efficient, you can actually just start typing India into the box here. So again, with this, because it's now reselected everything, we're going to unselect everything again and just hit India. And as you can see here in Excel underneath, it's now given us India here as the country. So now we're only going to return values for India. Next step, and I recommend always starting things step by step and start with the low-hanging fruit first. One of the things that we're going to want to look at is how the incidence of terrorism changes year after year after year. So while it might be interesting to put in months, what this is going to do is collapse all of the different months into January, February, March, April, May, June, July, etc. And so if we were trying to assess seasonality, this would be helpful, but generally speaking, it won't help us a whole lot. So instead, what we're going to do is click on this I-year variable. And again, we're just going to click and drag it into the columns. And now we can see we have India, and we along the top line of our little matrix here, we've got from 1995 all the way up to 2012. So now we have what's going to be eventually our x-axis and what's eventually going to be the basis for our y-axis in our graph. So remember, the y-axis is the one that goes up and down, and the x-axis is the one that goes from side to side. So now we're going to have a graph that has the years along the bottom of it. To start off with, let's start off with the number of terrorist attacks. There's dozens upon dozens of different ways that you can do this. The way that I recommend doing this within the global terrorism database is to click on any underscore txt variable and to drag this into the values box here. The reason why I recommend using an underscore txt name variable is because this is a text variable. Mathematically, Excel can't do anything other than count up the number of times there is a value within that row. So if this was a numeric value, for example, so let's see, at the moment it says 179, 211, 193 for 95, 96, and 97. Let's put in a region variable which has numbers into it and see what happens. And if you put in something that has numbers, which is the region without the text in the numeric form, what it's going to do is sum up all of those individual numbers for the underlying variable. So we don't want to do that. We want to pick a variable that is text related. And in this case, we'll use region underscore text. We could also use country underscore text as well, and it will return exactly the same numbers as you can see here. So this gives us the number of terrorist attacks in each given country in a given year. Because you suggested India as the country, how many terrorist attacks occurred in India in the year 2002?
182, sir.
Perfect. Very, very, very well done. And this is a quick and easy way for you to know the answers to these questions. And once you've downloaded these data from the Global Terrorism Database, even if your internet is out, you can still do this rudimentary form of analysis. And also, if the website just went out of existence for some inexplicable reason in the future, you'll have these data. You can always analyze them. And as I mentioned many, many times in class, this is the world's best database of terrorist attacks that has ever existed. So this is the best data we have globally. And so this gives us the number of attacks. That's step one. It's a very long step one, but step one nonetheless. But this is giving our first thing. I want to go a little bit deeper with you just so you've got this as a resource for the future. And what we're going to do now is create another one of these pivot tables that'll give us the number of people that were killed in those terrorist attacks. So to do that, we're going to go back to our data tab again. And we're going to click anywhere within the data tab again. Instead of C8, let's do D8 this time. We're going to go back to insert, and we're going to hit pivot table again. And so this is going to look really, really similar before. It's going to select all the data. Instead of going to new worksheet like we did last time, we're now going to go to existing worksheet. We're now going to click this button here on the right that I mentioned before, which kind of looks like a little mini spreadsheet here. This window is going to collapse into this form here. We're going to click on our sheet 1, which is where we were before. And let's click in A11 this time. So that way it gives us a little bit of space here. And what this is going to do is it's going to start a new pivot table within this sheet that we're going to be able to use as well. So once that's you've selected the cell where you want the new pivot table to begin, hit the enter key or the return key, depending on whether you're using a PC or a Mac, and then hit OK. And you'll see here that's going to create another pivot table within the same spreadsheet here. We're now going to repeat the beginnings of the process that we used last time. So again, we start with the low-hanging fruit. We start with the easiest steps first. We know that we're looking at India. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to filter down to look at India by clicking on country underscore text and dragging it into the rose box. We're going to click the downward arrow. We're going to type in India. We're going to deselect everything else. We're going to click India, and we're going to watch to make sure in the background that everything is happening to the degree that we want it to happen. We're going to then X out of that. And we want it to look the same as this as far as the X and Y axis goes. So that way we can plot both lines on the same graph. And we're going to do that by clicking on I year and dragging that to the columns button here. Again, one of the things I recommend doing is double checking everything every step of the way to make sure that everything adds up and everything is looking the right way that it should. For the next step, we're going to look at the number of people killed in each given year within India. To do this, we're going to look for another variable, which is called nkill, which stands for the number of people killed. Again, we could click in here. You could scroll down until you find nkill, which is a fair way down. Which is here. Or we could save ourselves a little time and just type in nkill up here. And as you can see, we can see the number of people killed. There's also a variable for the number of US persons who were killed in the terrorist attack. And there's also a variable for the number of terrorists that were killed in each terrorist attack as well. All of which variables can be really, really useful. But for today, we're just going to focus on nkill for this particular graph. So we're going to click and drag nkill down to our values box. One of the key things when it comes to numbers is we actually have some different options that are available to us. If we click on this little I button here, it might also be a downward arrow depending on which version of Microsoft Excel you've got. If you click on that, it'll give you different things that we can look at. So let's, for the sake of argument, pretend that we're looking at how lethal on average each terrorist attack was in a given country. To do that, what we do is click on this average button here, hit OK, and we'd see these numbers change here. So we could say in the year 1996, on average, 2.9 people were killed per terrorist attack in India, which is a very, very high number, very high number. In 1998, it got up to 6.5. And you can see how this as a measure of lethality per terrorist attack could be a very interesting thing. For this, however, we're interested in looking at the combined number of people that killed across all attacks that happen each given year. So to do this, we click on the I button again, and we go to sum. So what the sum command does within Microsoft Excel is it adds up all of the numeric values and returns what they would all end up together if you were to just plus them all together like that. Once we hit OK after that, we can see that there were 361 people killed across the 179 terrorist attacks in 1995 in India. We can see that there were 812 people that were killed in 2010 across 661 attacks. So that's a lot of terrorist attacks, and it's a lot of fatalities, unfortunately. And this gives an appreciation of the scale of terrorism in a country like India. There's been more than 5,000 terrorist attacks that have occurred between 1995 and 2012, resulting in more than 10,000 deaths. And that's a lot of unfortunate lives lost from something like terrorism. So this is one of the things I recommend when you're going through terrorism data, is to take a moment to recognize what these numbers mean, what they say they are, and not just seeing these as just individual data points. Every single number on this was a person whose life was lost to terrorism. So please don't forget the scale and the importance of what you're doing in this way. There is a quicker way to do this, but the next steps are designed to be much more foolproof, so that way other things can't go wrong in the future. One of the things that's happened to me in the past is I've made graphs like this, and because Excel has tried to be too smart, particularly when it's combined with Microsoft Word, one of the things that it can do is automatically update cells and update values in graphs in different documents if the documents are connected together. So one of the things that I do next, just to make sure that I don't make mistakes, is I will copy and paste the data out of these pivot tables somewhere else in the spreadsheet to make them stable numbers. Because if I don't make them stable numbers, and if I'm in this here and I drag something else into this, then it's going to make things go crazy. And it's going to just change the values and the way everything looks, which is not so good. Oh, there we go. Thought I was in trouble then for a second because I did Command Z. So one of the things, the next step we're going to do is we're going to select from A4 down to S5. So we get the years and we get the number of terrorist attacks that occurred in India. We're then going to copy this by going Command C or Control C, again, depending on whether you're a PC or Mac. And we're going to go Command V somewhere else in there. And what this is going to do, and we can check this up the top here, is just paste the values in here. You do have some other options here. We can use different ways of formatting these things. We can link the cells. We definitely do not want to link the cells because that would completely defeat the purpose of this next step. The other thing I want to highlight here is we're not selecting the grand total column here. We just want the number of attacks in each given year. The very next step that I do is I rename this variable. So rather than being India, we'll call this number of terrorist attacks. And just because I like to make things pretty, I'm going to make that cell the size so we can see all the information by double clicking between the B, the A, and the B columns here up the top. And that automatically resizes it to make sure that you can see all of the information there. Next, we're going to select from A13 all the way across to S13 to get the number of people that were killed. We're going to go Command or Control C again, and we're going to paste this in the row below what we pasted before. And so as we can see here, all of the numbers line up. We can visually double check this. 264 in 2012, check. 361 in 1995, check. 179, 179, 610, 610. So far, so good. Next, we're going to rename this. So we're going to call this the sum of fatalities. And you can call these things a whole bunch of different things. But the key thing that I recommend doing is labeling these things as early as you possibly can. So that way there's less likelihood that something will go wrong between now and when you finally present these data. Next, we're going to create the actual graph. So you can tell we're getting close to the end now. We're going to select from A18 all the way down to S20. And then we're going to go back to our Insert tab. And you can see here there's recommended charts. For this, on my version, we're going to click this wavy line thing here called a line graph. We're going to click the downward arrow and we're going to select the first option. Boop. And as we can see here, it makes a graph for us. But there's something not quite so right with this. There's actually a few things that are not quite so right with this. The first thing that should be jumping out to you is this blue line up the top. So rather than it reading this 95 through 2012 as being the years, which we want to be our x-axis, it's actually put it in as a different data series within the graph itself, which we don't want, particularly given that this number is much higher than everything else. That is not so good. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on this blue line, and you'll be able to see that you've clicked on the blue line because it'll select each of the individual data points. Next, we're going to do something you very rarely get to do in data with anything to do with data. And we're going to hit the delete key and make it disappear. So now we're left with the red line, which is the number of terrorist attacks in India. And we're left with the green line, which is the sum of fatalities in India, which looks thusly. I don't like putting chart titles in because it's the habit that I've got into from publishing in journals, and it also makes things a little bit clearer for this. So I'm also going to delete the chart title, but feel free to name this something like Terrorism in India. It helps if I can type, or something to that effect. If you want to put a title in for the graph, you're more than welcome to do that. But for now, I'm going to delete that to make things a little bit easier and clearer. Okay, next problem that we're going to solve is this. The labels for our x-axis go between 1 and 18, which is not so helpful. We want to make them the specific years that we want them to be. So to do this, we're going to click on this axis here, and we're going to click the Select Data button up here. When it comes to this, we've got an option here called Horizontal Category Axis Labels. And we've got our friendly little button here, which enables us to select the data. So we're going to click on this, and it's going to collapse the data screen again, and we're going to click on 1995 and drag it all the way across to 2012, let go, hit enter, and then we're going to see the magic. We're going to hit OK. And now for each given year, we now have the correct years listed at the bottom here. Progress, progress, progress. One of the things that you're going to want to do for a professional level graph as well is to label each of your axes. One of them is very easy. One of them is not so easy. So let's start with the easy one first, because we always take the low-hanging fruit first. And we're going to label our x-axis here, which again, remember, is the horizontal axis in our graph. We're going to go to Add Chart Element up here. We're going to go to Axis Titles, and we're going to talk about our primary horizontal, because we only have one horizontal. We're then going to click in this little box here. We're going to select all of the words within it, and we're going to type in year. Nothing too difficult about that. The trouble we have is actually labeling this y-axis, because we're not just measuring the number of terrorist attacks, we're also looking at the number of people killed. And those two things are not equivalent to one another, and there are all sorts of reasons why we'd want to look at them differently. Particularly for a country like the United States that saw more than 3,000 deaths in 2001 alone compared to most other years, it can make the entire scale of the graph very distorted. So one thing that you might want to do is to create a second y-axis. So that way we've got the number of terrorist attacks on the left and the number of people killed on the right for a secondary y-axis. So in this case, we've got green as the sum of fatalities. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this line here. We're going to go to Add Chart Element, go to Axes, go to More Axis Options, and we're going to get this window come up on the right-hand side here. It has a lot of information here, but this will change if we click on the green line again. So if you click on the green line again, as you can see, it says plot series on the primary axis or the secondary axis. So to do what we want to do, we're now going to select secondary axis. And as you can see, the numbers here change. And if we X out of this dialog box here, we can now see that we've got a secondary y-axis over here. So this can be a really handy tool that sort of like calibrates the data in that sort of way. You may not want to do that though, because this can make things look misleading. For example, if you're trying to minimize the number of fatalities and you're being particularly naughty and you wanted to get away with doing something like that visually, and your audience isn't very familiar with statistics, one of the things you could do is change the range on your y-axis. So if you double click on the labels of the y-axis, one of the things you could do is, instead of making the maximum 900, you could make it 90,000 and hit enter. And what does this make the number of fatalities look like in India? Makes it look like there's basically no fatalities compared to the number of terrorist attacks. This is one of the ways to willfully mislead your audience by using terrible, terrible data management skills. So this is bad, but I want you to be aware of it so you don't accidentally do it. So this is much more how the graph should look. One of the things you may want to do is to make it so your audience know that you're definitely not trying to deliberately mislead them, is to make the range of both of them the same. So this one goes from 0 to 900. This one goes from 0 to 800. So what we might do is double click on this one here and change this one as well to have a maximum of 900. There we go. And we X out, and now they're both on the same scale. Now to add in our chart titles, our axis labels, we're going to go to add chart element again. We're going to go to axis titles. We can go to primary vertical. We can select them all by doing Control A, excuse me, or Command A. And we'll call this the number of terrorist attacks. Good, I think I spelled that right. Go me. Next, sometimes this takes a little bit of time to refresh. So one of the things I do sometimes is you'll see me click out of the graph and then back into it. Go to art axis titles again, and we can see that it's not coming up here. So one of the things you might want to do is refresh it, because sometimes it takes Excel to recognize that there's now two different ones, and it's not doing it for us. So I'm just going to play around until it works out that there are multiple axis titles now. You can do it. There we go. As you can see, I changed nothing about this. I was just literally clicking around the screen, and it just took a little bit of time for Excel to catch up with me and work out that there's now a secondary vertical axis that can have an axis title. So now we're going to go to secondary vertical, and you'll see that this will include a secondary vertical axis title here, which we'll call the sum of terrorism fatalities. And what we have here, if you can follow all the way through to this point, is a very good looking professional grade graph displaying the number of terrorist attacks in India and the number of fatalities in each given year in India as well. Some little extra things to make it look extra professional. I often will get rid of these guidelines here just to make things look a little bit cleaner. I'll put pretty black boxes around things to make things look a little bit neat and that sort of way. To do that, I go to the Format tab and hit this first option here, boop, and then do that for the outside of the graph as well, just to make it look a little bit more clearly defined as the graph goes. As you saw in the original Bangladesh example, I also like to put things in black and white for a couple of different reasons. First reason is it saves on color printer money. And I do not have access to a color printer, so having two different gray lines does not help me. So first thing I'll do is I'll put the number of terrorist attacks as being a solid black line, and then I will do this one here. I'll make it black first of all, and then change it by clicking the arrow next to this into a dashed line. And here we've turned this into a dotted black line. But here we have a good looking professional graph. It shows us the key details of the number of fatalities and the number of terrorist attacks. All the axes are correctly labeled. We have the legend here to mark which line is which. And it's nice and clear. And even if you're colorblind, you're still going to be able to read it all. So once you've got a document like this, my recommendation is that you save it. So that way you can save and manipulate these things so you can just do it nice and quickly and easily for whichever country that you'd like to do. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope this was helpful. I'll be putting out the recording as soon as I can. I'll edit all of your faces out and all that kind of jazz. And then I will send out an announcement with access to the video. Thank you for being here. Enjoy your night. And I will see you all on Thursday. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a great evening.